All right, so listen, let's roll into this because I'm excited to hear your story for a couple different reasons. One, I'm a nerd that likes submarine stuff, but two, I love to get the feedback, and we have not talked about this yet. I love to get the feedback from those that make it to DCAC for their first time, and then those that aren't from the industry, so they're kind of not even understanding what to expect or what to compare it against.
Sure.
And I'm always interested to understand what the impact of it was on you, to determine if it stirred something that helped you feel inspired to maybe be in the industry or maybe guide you in another path. But regardless, why don't you introduce yourself?
So Jared Smith grew up in a small town in southwestern Pennsylvania. I would consider myself a farm boy. Growing up, baled hay, drove tractors, four-wheelers, all the stuff that I think my kids won't get a chance to do because of the Navy, moving around.
Yeah.
Just kind of, you have one tractor, you're over your weight limit for moves.
Was it like a family farm, or you did that
like
for
a
work?
family farm? Like it was a. So I don't know if you remember back in the 80s, the 700. I guess even in the 90s, the 700 Club, Pat Sajak, and the 700 Club.
Oh, for sure. I remember the name Pat Sajak.
Pat Robertson.
Oh no, don't know that.
So he was a 700 Club. It was like a Christian.
Oh, okay. yeah.
TV show. Or
I think I do know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That was early stages.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, my grandfather had a big hog farm, and they had these 700 Club plaques on the wall. And I was
because
like,
he donated to them.
No, it turns out it was because he had like 700 purebred hogs.
Really?
And I was like, didn't connect those two dots until later in life. But so that's kind of like the microcosm that I grew up in, showing stuff at the fair, putting up hay in the summers, taking pride and all that stuff. Never saw the ocean until I was in high school. Went on a vacation to the beach.
Which beach?
Myrtle Beach.
Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful beach. I mean, listen.
When you live in Southwest Pennsylvania, Myrtle Beach is the only beach that is the grand beach.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. That makes a ton of sense because everyone I met in Pennsylvania was always raving about it. I remember the first time I went was with someone from Pennsylvania.
Yeah. So there you go.
What all right, so that's a lot to unpackage too. Are you like the oldest, the youngest, the only child? I mean, if you have a farm, you typically have a few
older
kids.
brother.
Older?
Yeah, he's 5 years older. Older sister, she's 3 years older, and then a younger brother. He's 4 years younger.
Are any of them still involved with the family farm?
My older brother. So we had moved from that farm when I was in grade school. It was all like a family reorganization where my uncle and his family moved in our house, and we moved into a different farm a couple miles up the road, which at that point in my life seemed like a big move, even though it was like still same school district and all that stuff. It was just something
normal?
we just didn't. You don't see, like, a lot of people you didn't know people that moved, right? It was like,
Oh, I got you.
where now it's
Was it like a different part of the family farm then, or was it like a different business unit of the farm?
We moved like our stuff from our farm to have our own place, so it wasn't like a compilation of my grandfather's farm anymore. Like, we took our livestock and started this other farm. So my parents got this big old farmhouse and had a couple acres of yard and stuff like that, and 2 big barns, and they've lived there for, I guess, almost 30 years now. But my older brother, he went to Johns Hopkins for play football. Went there to school. Ended up going to law school back in Pennsylvania at Pitt, and now he lives closer to my parents, and so he's like essentially there. He loves all that stuff. He
Sure.
stores all of his tractors and toys.
Good for
and
him, man.
stuff back there, and then they're like, well, we don't have any more space, so they build another barn to put all this stuff in, and
That's cool though.
yeah,
It's good to keep that in the family and that someone's still investing in it. That's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah, so he and his kids are pretty big invested into that life too.
So your dad was a pig farmer, it sounds like, and like, did you have anybody in your family upstream of you that had been in the military, and if so, like in the Navy?
Yeah, so my dad actually, it turns out my grandfather kind of the businessman, and he was in the Navy, so he was in World War II, and he drove the delivery boats, like the flat deck landing craft,
the Higgins crafts.
Yeah. And he was in some of the beach invasions, and my other grandfather was in the Army, and he was a tank driver. So theoretically, their paths could have crossed at some point during, like, they were both on the invasions.
Really?
And
that's crazy.
Neither one of them ever talked to me about it until I was like kind of in my tail end of the Naval Academy. My grandfather, on my father's side, he purchased all of my initial uniforms and my sword and all that stuff.
That's
and
cool.
He chatted with me a little bit, and unfortunately he passed away not too long after that. And my grandfather on my mother's side that was in the Army, we'd never talked about that. He passed away my sophomore year when I was at the academy. So I didn't really get a chance to kind of like talk, but I feel like I have a lot of characteristics of both those, and we'll probably talk about it later. But my grandfather Smith, he was the business guy, and I didn't even know until recently. Like, I had recently told you about the real estate stuff that we do.
Yeah,
he was buying and like, he was a landlord back in the 50s and 60s, buying houses and renting them out, and
just hustling, entrepreneur stuff.
Just hustling.
Good for him.
They bought an old elementary school, and they turned it into a big parts store. So that's where my dad's worked for 50 years.
Really?
Ish. Came back from college. Started working at the Smith's Auto Supply about 15, 20 years ago. They got bought out by Napa, but it's still has the same namesake, but it's like Smith's Auto Supply Napa stuff. Cool. Yeah, so it's kind of a cool thing. And that was like right across the street from where my grandfather lived. So I would go to my dad's store, help him stock shelves, go hang out with my grandma and grandfather sometimes after school and stuff.
And that's awesome.
Yeah.
Is that is all of that still alive, I guess, in that town? Or you stayed within that same town?
Yeah,
right?
So all of that's within 10 miles of each other.
Is that where a majority of your family still?
That's where about half my
sister
family
as well, you said?
She lives in Florida.
Okay.
And then I'm in Norfolk, but my two brothers are back home in Pennsylvania near my family.
But you were the youngest?
I'm the middle.
Oh,
like
okay.
Second, middle, third, I guess.
I got you. And did all of, like, what did you do any sports? Yeah.
Yes.
What were your sports?
So, I mean, that was like, when you live in Southwest Pennsylvania, like, that's what you do, sports, right? So it was just like one thing. It was a lot different back then. I'm sure you remember, like, it wasn't like now where you specialize in one thing.
You do one sport and that's it for the rest of your life.
I mean, it was like baseball season rolled into football season, rolled into basketball or wrestling season.
Did you wrestle?
I wrestled for a couple years.
Tough state for wrestling, right?
Yeah, some of the guys, I think one year in my high school, we had like, 5 state champions or something in Pennsylvania.
One of them, I mean, there are, I think for the last few years, when you go to like the NCAAs and you watch the wrestling tournament for college Division I, they'll rank the states that have the most kids from that state competing at the NCAAs. Not necessarily for Penn State, they could be wrestling for Michigan or Ohio State, but Pennsylvania always they'd send the most kids to. I mean, that's just a testament to that character that's built in that state and the popularity of that sport.
Yeah,
it's a tough sport, but obviously football and hockey are big there too, right?
Yeah, football is huge. I always felt like baseball was really big, but I'd never been really outside there to compare it to. When you look at like Tennessee, Texas, all the South, like it's minuscule up there as compared, because they can play year round in those other states.
Yeah, Florida, California, Texas.
I was the biggest guy on my basketball team, so you can tell how successful our basketball team was.
Sucked. Is that your way of saying?
I mean, I was power forward.
What okay, so were you a good student?
I was a good student, yeah.
Like always a good student? Or
yeah, it was always kind of So I was a good student. I wasn't a great studier. It was just easy, right?
Oh.
So, and that came back to bite me whenever I went to first semester at Naval Academy when
Because you didn't have any study habits?
I had no study habits.
I have a kid in
was-
college that has that problem right now.
Yeah, it was just everything was just easy. The leading indicator was whenever I would take my finals at the end of the year, like my grades would always be high enough that I could carry whatever grade I got in a high school final. It wouldn't impact me. I'd still get A's. But the finals were always so hard because I didn't know like how to go back and do that studying. So it wasn't until really the Naval Academy did taught me how to study some, but it wasn't really until I was in.
That's an intense
Nuke
school
school.
to go to. So let's back up. At what point did you know you wanted to go to the Naval Academy?
Hmm.
Because if you're out of that area and you don't have a lot of military in your lineage, and I'm like, were you smart? Like, your aptitude seems like it was obviously pretty high based on what you've done. But typically, you have to be a pretty strong athlete. You know, the academies.
So that's what got me in the door was football.
Okay, football. But why did you pick the Naval Academy and why?
So I had looked at a couple of different schools. I got recruited by Penn State and went to some of their summer camps, and that ended up not panning out, obviously. So when that didn't pan out, my coach had contacted the service academies. So one week I had dinner with the Army coach. The very next week I had dinner with my area's coach from Naval Academy. And my brother and sister were both at school at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore.
Mhm.
So I knew that area.
close,
I'd been
yeah.
down there. And all you ever hear, you see the wave of Army gray and like how cold it is up there
Yeah.
in the Hudson Valley. And so I talked to the Army coach and told him that I decided to go to the Navy. He told me, like,
He
good
said
luck.
beat Navy.
He said, good luck, and slammed the phone down.
For real?
Yeah,
Ah.
he wasn't happy. So that was like my foot in the door. So I went down like a week later, signed papers. I had no idea that I had to like serve in the Navy or anything.
Okay, so that's what I was trying to figure out. I mean, like,
Yeah.
what did you know that? Was that because you, like when I had Tony Grayson on, right? Tony's a Navy Academy guy,
Mhm.
but he went to the Naval Academy because he wanted to be a sub captain, right? And he was like, that's got to be the best way to be one. And you just wanted to go to the Naval Academy because they let you play football and you didn't have to pay to go to school?
I mean, turns out having a brother and sister preceding you at a expensive private school
Yeah.
doesn't bode too well.
Parents were like, I hope you got good enough grades to get a full ride.
Yeah, pretty
Well,
much.
obviously you do, right? So that made the decision for you, it sounds like, huh? And then
Yeah,
how long?
so-
Because you have to be pretty far ahead of that, right? Because you have to get your nominations. You have to work on that a year in advance.
Yeah, so if you're good at a sport, some of that stuff happens pretty quick, and
Gotcha.
like you don't go through the normal.
What was your
process.
position in football?
I was I got recruited as a quarterback.
Oh, really?
So the current coach, or the coach that had just ended his tenure at Navy, Kenny Matalolu.
Oh, yeah.
He
Was he your coach?
He was my quarterback's coach when I first went there. But some of the things that you don't learn in being a big fish in a small pond school is how to deal with some of that adversity and stuff when you don't ever have that adversity. So whenever I first went there, and there was 7 or 8 guys on the quarterback depth chart when we started
Really?
football camp in the fall. And you're number 7.
They
because-
convert you to like a,
Well, no, like they didn't do anything, but I was very discouraged at that.
sure.
And didn't have any perspective to look at it through a different lens, right? So my lens was, I'm a 7th on the depth chart. Like, I came here, I want to play now. So I tried to go to a different position, but then, so now I've like offset myself from that first position. Now I'm in this other position, but turns out like I'm just in the same spot in the depth chart, but now I'm in a different position, and I've like not solidifying. And then the next year I switched back, and so I played for a year and a half there, and then ended up shifting over to rugby,
Oh, great sport.
which
Which is big at the academies.
yeah, it's huge. And they just recently got their varsity like made into a varsity sport. It was a club sport while I was
Oh, I
there.
got you.
Even though we played varsity teams, like my junior year, I went from the way the rugby works is, excuse me if I don't know if you know any rugby or
Explain it
not,
to
but
anybody.
so we had an A and a B side. That was like our varsity team. The best 30 guys, 15 guys played at a time. And then there's a JV squad, and the JV squad, 15 people per side. And it was, when I first got there, it was an A, B, C, D, E, and F side.
That's how many.
And we kept a depth chart up in the rugby locker room, and with everybody's name, and my name was all the way on F side of the JV team. So, I was like ninth string.
So you had to slug your way through.
Right. So, but some of that, now I had some of that different perspective that I didn't have when I first went in to play football. And I knew that if you just work hard, like the talent wasn't my issue, it was my head getting into my way. Right. So I slugged it through the first semester, learned the game. So I went from F side my sophomore year, spring, to starting on the A side on the varsity the next fall. And
Nice.
It was all just like, I paid my dues.
Sure.
I learned the game. I came out and practiced whenever the JV season was over and it was just the varsity guys. Like I got some great advice from some of the head guys that were like the juniors and seniors that played rugby in my company. They're like, hey, just come out once the JV season's over. Like, come out and just practice with the varsity guys. Like, give them some run time. Like, you're fast. You're a good
That's cool.
tackler. And I ran our starting hooker down, and he's like this really ridiculous athlete. And
he's one of the biggest guys on the team.
His name was Roy Nicka, and he was probably like 5'11", like 210 pounds, just like really stout guy. And I ran him down and hit him pretty hard. And I just remember like he rolled on the ground and he got up and he's like, who the hell was that? And one of the other guys in my company was like, oh, that's Jared. And just like, very humble.
He says, what's up?
And just walk back and reset and do it over. And that it's one of the things we're trying to teach
it's a gentleman's sport, they say, right?
Gentleman's sport, but it's now, that's something I'm trying to teach my daughter as she's starting some competitive sports. She's 12. She's starting competitive volleyball, and she's tall for her age, but she's like 5'5", 5'6" as a 12-year-old. And there's like another girl on her team that's like 5'8", 5'9", as a 12-year-old.
That's insane.
And they're competing for the same position. So if you look at just like size alone, but there's a lot more that a coach looks at than like just size, right? Like, how agile are you? How much what's your effort level? Are you putting in that extra things? Do you know the plays? Can you set, like all of that, all of those things that I didn't ever have to do any of those, right? Which like in life, how life works in funny ways. Fast forward 21 years, and now here I am at the end of my Navy career, and I'm getting ready to enter into some civilian sector, and I'm going to be using some of those same things that I've learned as a freshman in college, being pretty far down on the depth chart, right? Because my goal is not be 7th string in some company somewhere. My ultimate goal is to, be first string, right?
Yeah.
So figuring out like using those tools those life lessons, and like how you implement them, I think is important. And that's why I use so many sports analogies in everything that I do. And I probably annoy the heck out of people because of it. But I just think there's so many life lessons that you can extract from those and apply.
I agree. I had a poster I gave to my kids when they were really young, my boys that wrestled, and it was just a quote from Dan Gable. It says, wrestling is life. And once you've wrestled, everything else in life is easy, right? So I've always just used sports as the best stepping stone to help connect that narrative, as a parent, I guess, when I'm trying to explain to my kids, how what they're doing as athletes actually transcends to what they're going to do as professionals, right? And if you're unhireable, if you're uncoachable as a kid, you're definitely going to be unhireable as an adult, right? So how they have to kind of use that that sport is an incubator to learn how to engage and interact with others, especially in a volatile or high emotional state like a competitive game,
Sure.
right? But there's a lot of stuff to be gained from that. But so going back, first of all, 98 to, you graduated 2002?
I graduated high school in 98, graduated college in 2002.
Did you guys ever lose to West Point in those 4 years you were
We
in college?
did. I think we were.
I thought they won it for like Navy had it for like
that was-
14
that-
years. or
That
something.
happened. Like we just got them warmed up, and then
I thought you guys.
they had a great run. I think we were like maybe 2-2 during those years.
Do you still get like my brother's West Point class of 96, and you could kind of count on my front yard being, they do the yard card on your front yard,
yeah,
and it'll
yeah.
just, like beat Navy or, what I'm saying? But like my brother, now that they're winning, he's all about like reminding you, of that
Of
stuff.
course.
But I have to imagine you feel some of that too, right? So that's such a special school to go to. Any of the academies are like historical museums
Sure.
for education as well. And you get one of the best educations in the world. I think that they have some of the best leaders that the military has to offer, or, what you guys do as military or non-veteran in the civilian fleet, I guess. But you left, like at what point when you were at the Naval Academy, did you know that you wanted to be on the submarine? And what type, and like, was it a choice, or
I
did
didn't-
you?
I mean, I don't know if I could have shown a difference between like a school bus and a submarine when I first went there.
Oh,
So I really love what the Marines do, and at that time I love the esprit de corps and like the physical challenges and like the bonding that
they have a special camaraderie.
yeah, special camaraderie. What I didn't like is this is about as short as my hair ever likes to be. That I like it. So that was like the one aspect. Like,
The high
that
and
was
tight wasn't your style.
that wasn't my style. I really like driving ships. So surface warfare, I'd done a couple
Midshipman runs or something.
midshipman runs as surface. One was in San Diego 1 year, and then I did another one with ended up with two of the guys that I played rugby with, or they were on a frigate out of Everett, Washington, and that was a fun summer cruise with two of those guys. It's like any other sport where you have guys that precede you. And like ducks, right?
Sure.
So they watched out for me, and later on I went and played like all Navy rugby and stuff with some of those guys, and it was a cool experience. I think you were telling me earlier about some of the reprimands that you've seen. I saw some great reprimands. You see more stuff on a surface ship in a day than you
For
do
real.
on a submarine in months.
I can't imagine, I guess I should imagine, but did you do a midshipman cruise on a submarine? So
No.
you didn't even do a cruise to figure out if you wanted to do
The
it?
first time I saw a
That's some
submarine
psychopath shit
was
right there.
when
You're
I
crazy.
when I went down into the one at Prototype.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That was it. But I was already like way down the road. But so what got me into the submarine force was a guy named Captain Parker, who was our battalion officer. And at the academy, they do like surface warfare briefs, they do marine briefs, and this one was the submarine brief. So they sit all the first class midshipmen down in an auditorium, and then the battalion officer that's in that specialty. So he's a submarine officer. Gives a
He
brief.
sold it.
He sold it hard, right?
Was he a boomer guy or was he fast attack?
No, by that point, the guys have done fast boats, boomers.
Oh,
I mean, it's pretty rare. I have some friends that have only done fast boats through their CO tour.
Really?
But it's pretty uncommon.
They
Usually
make
do.
you go, okay, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so like my first tour was on a boomer, and then my last 4 tours were all on fast boats.
Which one did you like more?
They each have their pluses and minuses. And it's hard to compare too because of the time frame difference.
Yeah.
A JO on a boomer was just different than what you would get as a JO on a fast boat. As
Like a
far as-
magnitude of responsibility different, or like a
Yeah,
better
I
quality
think
of life different?
I think both. When I walked on to the USS Cheyenne was my department
Yeah.
head tour, and my first interaction was like within that first week or so with the junior officers. I was like, man, these guys are working way harder than I ever worked as a
On a
junior
fast attack.
officer. And it's just because they have more things stacked on top of them.
It's more concentrated. It seems.
It's more concentrated. It's not as well laid out because it's you don't have that designated training period. So on a boomer, you have
3 months.
3 months where the officers are all training together. You do the combined crew stuff, and then the officers go and train, and then when they come back, you take the boat over. But during that 3
Are
months,
you guys in simulators during that 3 months?
yeah, simulators, classroom training, all that stuff, and then during when you're at sea, you do a couple weeks of refit, and then you go out to sea on a fast boat. You might be in port on Tuesday, out to sea on Wednesday, in port on Friday.
288 days a year on average, I think I was going.
Yeah.
But I love that. I mean,
Yeah.
I like that. But it is anytime. There's no set schedule for
Yeah.
sure.
My wife kept track. I think the first 400 days or something, I was going 285 on my command tour on New Mexico. And then after that, she just stopped
Keeping score.
tracking.
Yeah. That's tough. It's tough with the families back home, right?
Yeah.
You have, did you have kids by then?
Yeah. So we had my daughter during my department head tour. She was born in Hawaii about halfway through my department head tour. I was in and out about probably 3 of her first 6 months, and then I was gone from month 6 to month 11.9, and I got back just in time for her first birthday from deployment. So I missed all those things, those firsts that you miss, first words, first steps, all those things. Luckily, my wife caught a lot of that stuff on video. But yeah.
I'll say this because I'll pause. Because I think that that's something that's really significant to mention, right? And I say that because, the genesis behind this is I think that, so there's 2 of the most popular podcast shows in our industry, I should say. Dave Liggett, it does a Data Center Hawk podcast. If you haven't listened to it, it's fantastic, especially he kind of wraps up the end of the year and gives some predictions for 2023. He's typically he's always putting the ball right over the plate. He's pretty close.
Yeah.
And then there's another one called Data Center Frontier. And there's a guy named Rich Miller who does a lot of publications. He has a podcast too, and I think I did both of theirs last year, and I think I'm one of them. Is that you heard me? We connected somehow.
Yeah, I think it was the Data Center Frontier, and at that point, so we'll rephrase the question: how I've even heard about data centers,
Sure,
because I think about every podcast that I hear the same theme of nobody trained to be in data centers. We're all just fell into it. Type thing.
Literally.
So I was, I guess in grand fashion, just walking one of the other COs on the CO of the USS Arkansas, or the PCU Arkansas. He's like, "Hey, did you hear that one of my buddies is getting out, Matt Frenier, and he's doing data centers. He's making a lot of money."
Oh,
And I was like, I don't know, maybe I could do data centers.
sure. But how long ago was that the term
This was
even hit your lexicon?
less than 6 months ago.
Okay, so it's top of mind because I met you shortly after.
Shortly after. So, I don't let opportunity at that point I'm starting to get primed up I need to figure out what I want to do in my next chapter of life. So I started doing some research on data centers, like a good nuke, right? I'm doing my homework, studying, start looking at all the data center podcasts, starting looking at LinkedIn, get in touch with Tony. I think he was one of the first guys that I had a call with, and
Tony Grayson. Compass.
And he said, "Hey, I'm going to be doing a podcast with Kirk. And I'm like, who's Kirk? He explained, and I was like, all right, cool. I'll look that up. So I listened to the one that you did with Tony. And then from that, think I listened to the Data Center Frontier one. And then I was like, with technology today, it's pretty easy to, it's crazy how accessible people are on social media. Right. So I'm like, I just heard this guy on a podcast. I don't know who he is. Dear Kirk, my name is Jared. I'm submarine commanding officer. I'm interested in learning more about podcasts. You have time for a call? It was something like that. And I think within like 5 seconds, you were back and like, oh man, that sounds awesome. Like, let's set up a time to chat. I put together this little conference called DCAC. You should check it out. You sent me the link, and that all happened within like a day or two. And
wow.
And then I started listening to more podcasts, and then I came down to Austin and had my socks blown off me.
Wow. Well, listen, that's really where I wanted to try to see if we could bring this back to. I wanted people to understand where you came from a little bit. And I think that there's enough military people in this industry, despite the fact that we don't really target them. I mean, there are a few groups, right, that do. And it's typically guys like us, like Tom Furlong at Facebook, right? He, former Navy Academy grad, but he, listen, he would go out to the bases. He'd go to Pearl and he'd go to TAP classes. And he or his staff, I should say, right? But he knew early on that that's an untapped resource, and it gave Facebook an advantage in the early days for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that other people were just kind of stumbling into it on themselves. Like it was like, hey, I know a guy that's going in the data centers, and it's like 1 out of 10 people are stumbling into it. And as a byproduct of that, we are all growing like organically. Like I got a buddy that I brought in because you were one of like 4 or 5 submarine commanders that when we started doing these things, I get a pretty steady number of notes on like LinkedIn, which is the best way. Like you said, we're all approachable, but in LinkedIn, it's even easier, right?
Yeah.
If you have a profile, you could, and I was getting a lot of senior ranking officers, like you were an 05, right? Or you're an 05 now, right? So I had I had 3 or 4 05s and a couple of 06s that had reached out, and really the best guy for me to think of to try to make sure I was connecting those dots to would be because I was enlisted, finding other officers that came from the same submarine background was something that I thought would be the easiest and the most accretive for you, because the path that you would go into typically from, right into an operational management, incubator of leadership type of role, which is very prevalent when you have a technical background as deep as yours, or it's funny, there are a lot of people that have a very high IQ, but they have a very high EQ, and they have the ability to, analyze and interpret social dynamics in real time, right? So they're able to be better at business development or sales or marketing. And there's some that gravitate that way too, because they'd rather be in the pot, stirring it from a discussion, from a new narrative perspective. And fortunately for you, there's some of those that are everything. I mean, Tony's a hybrid, right? He's got a big fat brain, but he also really likes to be evangelizing about the advantages of hiring more veterans, and he's the best one, I felt, to block and tackle from an officer perspective. But from an industry perspective, having been enlisted instead, I did grow from the industry from the bottom up I carried a tool bag for years, and just kind of kept evolving as I began to discover more about the industry. And there's no book about this. This is straight up immersion, right? It's like, there's really not a real strong book. I could sit in all the classrooms in the world to be taught about submarines, but until I get on one, and it takes time to even be able to bring value until you're no longer a nub on a boat or a non-useful body, right? So it takes time from the time that you're educated, from the time that you get into a practical experience, practical, outside a prototype, and then you go to the boat, and then it takes a long time from the time you start to the time you finish till you are of value, where you can stand a watch and, you do things that contribute to the command, right? And it almost takes that same type of effort and patience and grace when you transition in. So the reason why I want to have these conversations is I'm so invested. Our business is only invested in this industry, but we're really invested in creating a solution for the existential threat of this industry, which is the pent up demand of labor that we're already running short of. While we, in the next few years, having almost half of our workforce, which is, more than 2 million people globally, we have about half of them been in the industry for longer than 20 years, meaning the silver tsunami could be starting in the next couple of years, and we'll start seeing waves of people. And 45% of the industry is about 900,000 people. So there's a lot of people that are going to be leaving, including a lot of the very senior people with all the most experience. And we have to start now aggressively trying to bring on, we can't just hire from within the industry. And about 20% of our industry is shifting all the time within the industry. But 10% of our industry, sadly, is being lost to competitive industries like healthcare or high tech semiconductor work, or, people just they don't want to work in that market. So they're going to stay in this town and work for a different builder or do something different. My thing is we're almost at the threshold of a crisis in our industry. And there's only so many we could draw from high schools, universities, and the trades, and the military needs to have a better glide path. And you, in your role, like, it was important for me to get all the senior guys that I could, like every one of those officers. I was like, I'll give you a free ticket. I mean, I'll help you with lodging. I wanted you there because I wanted you guys to take that back. Just like I flew in a Master Chief, a guy from San Diego. He spent like 21 years in Pearl Harbor. And he's at Naval Station San Diego, I think, right now. And I flew him in because as a Master Chief, he has the ability to have a pretty large audience because 85% of the Navy, there's 323,000 people in the Navy, 85% of them are enlisted.
Sure.
And there's, 1% of those people are Master Chiefs, and they have a pretty loud megaphone, right? So I'm like, I need officers preaching this because we need the senior leaders as well with the engineering degrees and all the capabilities and horsepower they have working in high pressure environments. But we also need those that can go bring those visions to life, right? And we need more skilled labor and talent. And I think that as long as we as an industry continue to adopt character and then train for talent, we'll be able to continuously grow greater and faster than every other industry that's out there right now. So for you coming for the first time, I've never asked you, and I said, I don't want to talk about it until we talk about it here, because I'm like, what was it like coming to your first trade show for data centers? And I'm not telling you to pretend it's not my trade show.
Yeah,
what was the impact? And did it stir something inside of you, or did you discover something, or did you get to meet the right person, or what was the value of taking the time away from your command to come here?
So, reference my experience in conferences, Navy conferences. It was slightly different than my introduction into DCAC.
I want to hear your unfiltered version at some point, like when you went back and people were like, so what was it like? You're like, let me tell you, right? So like, give it all to me.
Yeah. So first of all, it was first thing I did was the golf tournament, right?
And I think they paired you with my dad, the colonel.
Yeah.
So my dad is retired 05, right? And he was enlisted.
I think we should have won, but I think we didn't. We thought it would look weird if the host's dad won, so we gave a few strokes. But it might have been the jello shots that were available.
He's an Air Force guy. Once he gets jazz hands, probably by a whole 9, because he's probably had 3 too many jello shots or something. Air Force guys can't hold their booze. We know that. So
we got off to a bad start that first hole, anyways, because there this commercial real estate deal that we were doing.
Oh, okay.
There was some bad due diligence because we got some bad information. And
so that's your side pot. You have a side kit where you're doing real estate deals on the side and golfing at the same time.
So we're getting ready to tee off, and I get a phone call saying like, "Hey, all this stuff is wrong," and now I'm freaking out. Like, oh, did I make a terrible mistake by coming here to Austin while this deal is about to fall through, or something go awry? We work through it, right? I go into battle damage mode. I'm making phone calls, teeing off, drinking water. That was available on every hole, and that threw me off my game a little bit. But that was just just the different people that I met through the day of golf, and then the One Tribe Foundation.
Oh, sure, Jake
Schick. Listen to all that stuff. I mean, by that dinner, by that time it had been a long day already, and it was like just getting
Did you get someone
getting
probably picked you up for
started.
dined. I wasn't babysitting you. I knew that you were in town and
I
stuff.
think
but
the first night
someone
we
had
had
to scoop you up.
we had that happy hour the first night.
Yeah.
Because we ate dinner at the golf course, and then we went out to the
We had a networking event that night.
yeah,
back
the
at
network. And typically, I mean, that was a pretty ridiculous networking event, right? You just rent out the entire bar. That's not usually.
Yeah, we rent out
Well,
all of ACL. So
yeah.
every year we try to make things different. I used to just rent a bar downtown for the VIP, and I would just take all the VIPs. So the night before, I would take every speaker, and then the other VIPs that are significant to industry,
Yeah.
or large sponsors to these types of events, and I would just rent out an entire bar on 6th Street and be like, this is where we're going to do our VIP just for us, and then later on open it up for everybody else.
Yes.
But that year we used the upstairs at ACL.
So, I mean, my main goal for coming to the conference was to network and to meet
Sure.
people and talk to people about it. And I'd like to come back to the comment you made about EQ later, because I think it's such an important piece of the puzzle that you were a submariner, I'm a submariner. I think we're wired a little differently than
Yeah, for
the
sure.
average submariner. But when you mix in all the some submarine senior leadership, but you balance out with Marines, you have a lot of special forces guys who are historically very high EQ type folks. It balances some of those out. So going back, so my goal was to network, and I spent like the full 3 hours or whatever that the bar was rented out, like just talking to folks from every different industry. It was a good way to interact with people, low pressure environments. I had follow-up calls with multiple people
Let me think. So at the VIP, you met Peter Gross, who's one of the biggest
Oh yeah,
powerhouses.
because the VIP was before, because we had the happy hour, and then we went to the So I met Peter Gross,
Dean Nelson,
Dean Nelson. You
Chris
said,
Crosby.
hey, look at that guy in that black cowboy hat down there.
Oh yeah,
And
that was Bill.
And I think Bill was doing some dance or something
Sure.
down there, and I was like, I don't know who that guy is, but he looks like he likes to have a good time.
Yeah. He just left Switch. We'll see where he lands.
Yeah, so I didn't. My only interaction with Bill, because he was busy talking to somebody else, was at the very end of DCAC when we went up and got some of the pictures with Dean and
Sure.
And Bill.
Crosby was there. You got to meet Crosby.
was there.
There was a
Obviously.
couple other guys. Tony was
Tony
there.
was there.
There was a couple other submarine officers that I had there too. I hope that you got a chance to.
Yep, had a chance to meet some of the other veterans that were.
There's
that
a couple
were there.
guys that are in this industry that are submarine officer veterans and
Yeah.
stuff, but it's a small
Alan.
community.
Alan Roach was.
He's a stud. Yep.
He was there, and he's with HDR, and we were talking a lot about kind of what he does, and was kind of laying. And I had listened to his podcast with you that you did over the summer, or early fall, and his mentality of how he approaches problems is very similar to.
Very analytical. Yep.
Yeah, very analytical. But he talked a lot about in his podcast about the EQ stuff, self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy is a huge piece of that, obviously. So we did a happy hour, and then we went to the after happy hour, and that was all like day one. And I didn't know what I was like, well, that was a pretty good start. I don't even know what
Day two's where the
day
meat and
two's like the
potatoes is.
actual stuff happens. So then we roll in day two, and you're like, hey, I asked you if I should wear my uniform.
I asked you to, remember?
Yeah.
I'm like, please do, because I was handing out awards.
Yeah.
But
We're going to need to work on the choreography for that one next time.
so I'll tell you, I suck at a lot of things, and that was one of them. That was 100% on me, right? So I was getting ready to sell DCAC, and I almost embarrassed to say this, but I don't feel like I put as much passion into it last year as I have in the years before. I feel like last year wasn't the best year we've ever had. I think that there's been years where we've had more disruptive content that originated more of a groundswell as a byproduct of the conference, where people left and they were like, hey, I'm gonna go learn more about these things, or I'm gonna go talk to this person more. And I just felt like we were moving the needle a little bit more. In this one, it was just too many things going on with my day job at Overwatch because we were also growing, 300% year over year. So we're like the massive scalability and growth of the industry.
Sure.
I was feeling the ripple effects of that on both fronts, and the data center conference kind of, I think, suffered the most. And I was like, please put on your uniform, because I wanted to hand out awards to those groups from a active Navy submarine commander, because I think that would be really meaningful to them, right? And at the end of the day, shit hit the fan for me in that morning too, and I was just in a triage mode trying to make sure that the clock was spinning right. So
Yeah.
I suck. I apologize, but I mean, you probably still got some attention with that uniform on. People approach you.
Yeah, so I had my whites on, and I spent probably the next 8 hours straight. I think I took a quick break to eat like a taco while I was standing out there. But,
Were you being overrun, or
yeah, I mean, it was if somebody wasn't approaching me to have a discussion, either interested in just like what the heck I'm doing there, or to thank me for my service, or to approached by several different people to have follow-on discussions about stuff, and then in between, like if that died down, then I was going and approaching different people and trying to learn as much as I could about the industry. And there were a lot of people that had some connection that they wanted me to connect with, because.
But you were getting sticky. I mean, do you feel like you showed up and you were welcomed, and it seems like you were being approached by more people than you were probably even feeling like you had to go approach, but you feel like it was I like to think that this industry is very welcoming to new people.
Absolutely.
They really want people in this space, and people are always excited to talk about what they're doing and try to drag people into it. But I was hoping that you would get that.
Yeah, no, it was very welcoming. Everybody was,
get some business cards, get some connections.
I had to bring 2 Ziploc bags home with.
Good, man.
With
That's
all
what
the
you want with
Ziplocs.
that.
And I came home and I set up probably 20 calls with folks, and some of them were Navy related, like post CO, post command guys that are now into the data center industry. They may have been guys that got out after their engineer tour, XO tour.
They're just giving you guidance on the transition.
Yeah, giving me guidance, letting me know if they could, if I had any questions, give them a call. And then I got involved, and I don't even remember exactly how I reached out to Bill Clayman. I think I linked in again and started chatting with him and set up a call. And he gave me some really good advice on some different stuff.
Sure.
And what amazed me the most is just, again, how accessible and how willing people were to help. Nobody ever once said no. They just said, maybe I can, let's figure out a time. And that was the only, that was the hurdle to get over, just what time they could do it, not they weren't going to do it.
So knowing that your business deal with your real estate development was on the ropes when you were golfing, by the time that you were at the conference, were you able to kind of learn some stuff? I mean, there were some pretty powerful speakers still on stage talking about, we have a very, very specific run of show that we're going to do for it next year, because now I'm investing way more time and effort and energy into that. We're going to have, next year will be the greatest conference we've ever done, just because we already know what our tracks are going to look like.
Yeah.
And for that, they're designed the conference is designed to allow you or anybody else to meet. I mean, imagine every industry has celebrities. You met a couple of the biggest celebrities in our sport at that conference, and you were able to imagine going to a conference and walking up to Kobe, or something, or LeBron back in the day, just imagine, right? And that's kind of the equivalency of what you were able to do. Those conferences add that, but they should also have an element of education where they're not really designed to give anybody a PhD on or make them a subject matter expert on some aspect of the industry. It's really designed for them to say something that will stimulate something to where they realize that they need to go dig deeper. They need to go scratch the paint more on that subject or topic, and they need to discover that they have a blind spot. And that's the part they need to study next, right? Were you able to learn anything from the industry conference itself that allowed you to walk away knowing more about the data centers themselves as well as the industry?
Yeah, so I think going into it, I mean, because I had done some of that research and studying, I understood that there were more parts to the data center, and without even knowing about data centers, from my submarine experience with mission critical power of a nuclear reactor and all the power plant, it turns out that those two are almost identical, with the exception of one's doesn't have a nuclear reactor yet. But
there was a lot of conversations about going that path though at that conference.
Yeah, so I mean, on my drive to the golf course, one of the gentlemen was telling me, he's like, oh yeah, and then you have different power sources, and then you have, if those go down, you have ups, and you have VLRA battery, and I was like, this is literally the same exact.
Yeah, it's the
thing.
DC plant.
With the exception of the diesels, we had to count the periscope depth before you can run them.
Right.
On a data center, it's 15-30 seconds before they're
Well,
on the bus.
the ATS will flip in 3. The gen's running by then.
Yeah.
Phase matches in 8 seconds. It's done by 11 or 12 seconds.
Yeah, so just a little bit faster than.
Yeah, it's fast.
Which is cool. And when I think of a natural transition would be like into operations of one of these, but I also like a good challenge, and I've also been like preparing myself for a transition into the civilian sector. So going back and getting my MBA, the real estate stuff that we do on the side is like super interesting. And going to DCAC, like I didn't understand that piece of the puzzle of how big of a impact the site selection has and how limited, like
sure.
right now, the main cities that are driving all the demand, where all the demand is, but then eventually that demand is going to max out of the power consumption before the city's like, hey, you can't have any more of this right now until they get different power sources. So like the JLL presentations were super insightful. Like the general background presentations too, like the opening and closing ones that you had there were great. Unfortunately, I got sidetracked. I was getting not sabotaged. I was getting held up out in the main lobby with so many discussions that I caught about 60% of the presenters.
Yeah.
Which I
that's all right.
Regretted some, but I was also learning a ton out in the space too.
The networking is just as important, especially if you're in your transition, right? Because in that transition, it's not as important for you to understand. You need to have a general awareness of what a data center is from maybe a vernacular perspective. Like you have to understand the dialect. Understanding, it's a very simple industry. There's really 3 different types of data centers: enterprise, colo, or cloud, right? And there are only 5 stages of a data center life cycle. And of those 5, there's about 9 different domains for employment that represent about 230 different jobs. It's not that big, right? I mean, like, think about it like this. You had to choose to join a branch of service and you chose one of those, almost like you would have chose a vertical of industry. And then within that industry, you had to choose a job. And in that industry, the Navy, you chose submarines. So my thing is, it's not that much different. People tend to not start with what matters most. And they just get caught in the game of like, this is the homogenous trajectory and everyone's going that direction. And I have to try to be in the front of the pack. But the reality is if you just stop and figure out, hey, what do I really want to do? Where's my passion for? I'm going to do better at that. My output and my productivity is just going to be higher because I'm going to have less resistance or drag. My thing is, you don't have to know the exact job. Just get into the game, right? And then realize, like, most people, if you look at their LinkedIns, they have, it's very rare. One of my best friends on earth has worked for the same company his entire career. That's great because he took him from 50 million a year in top line to 3 billion, right? And so he's basically in, the same brand, but he's reinvented that company so many times or been a part of that he's been allowed to be a part of the transaction, like the major transitions. And those are necessary for us to learn. Sometimes you're not going to find that where you're at and you're going to have to leave to go learn that next phase. Plus, I mean, the industry is like baseball, right? So there's first base, second base, third base. There's a whole strategy for the outfield and that for the infield between the pitcher and the catcher. And then, you got to understand how all these other people play amongst themselves. And that takes time. Sometimes you have to play first base and then go to the next company and play second. But my advice is like figure out how to get in. And there's a lot of people in this industry that are doing something they either don't, maybe they mistake the fact that they're good at it, that that's what they should be doing, or they're just not sure what to do next because the fear of the unknown is worse than the fear of the known. So, there's a lot of people that are struggling to try to figure it out. There's going to be changes. There's always about 20% of the market turns every year, right? 10% of the market leaves to go to a different industry of competition. And that 20% churn is really not just people evolving within their own. There's a lot of poaching within this industry, right?
Sure.
And the demand for labor is only going to grow worse over the course of time, right? So we should expect a lot more of that cross-lateral poaching too. But for you coming in, like knowing that your passion is entrepreneur, or you more into real estate or real estate development, then yeah, you should be talking to the JLLs and the CBREs and the Cushmans or the Colliers. But there's a lot of operators too that find a lot of value in the technical operational background that you have, plus the fact that I kind of skipped over your background, but you were the captain of the New Mexico, but when I met you, you were the captain of the New Jersey.
That's right.
And is that the newest submarine in the fleet?
Yeah. So a couple of things that it has. It's the next submarine to get commissioned. So it'll be joining the fleet at the end of this year. It's the first pre-commissioned unit, so the first sub is being built from the ground up with a fully integrated by design layout on the submarine, so male, female. And when I left, we had the first female enlisted chief.
No kidding.
Report on board. And between now and March, they're going to have their first wave of junior female sailors.
Are they coming from like the carriers, or where are they bringing them?
No, these are accession sailors, so they're coming in out of high school. Or
well, if you're a chief, though, you're coming as a yeoman.
Well, yeah, she did back-to-back sea tours on 2 different GNs,
okay.
And then straight to the made chief and straight to the New Jersey.
Gotcha. Cool.
Torpedoman.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how much of a percentage of the crew will be female on that?
It'll end up being about 20 to 25%. Yeah.
I mean, listen, how new has that been where we've had women on submarines?
So the officers have been a little over 10 years or around 10 years.
Really?
Yeah. The female enlisted.
Were they only going on like boomers at first?
They had certain subs. They started on boomers and then they started integrating into Virginia class. No 688s have any females. But I was part of you talk about being a change agent, part of the initial, working as a detailer in the HR shop at Navy back in Millington. Our office was the one that came up with the number of like how many females we would put on the different types of submarines and all that stuff. And then I went to sea to go be my executive officer tour, came back, and then I was managing some of these female enlisted and now it come to fruition that they were on some of the SSGNs, the guided missile submarines. And then I come back to do my CO tour, go operational, no females, and then go to the PCU New Jersey. And if you've never seen a warship being built, it's a pretty incredible thing to see kind of all the pieces and like how they build it in modules. So some of them get built up in Connecticut and shipped down. Some of the pieces of it get built in Virginia and get shipped up because they're building boats up in Connecticut as well.
Electric boat, yeah.
And just like the technology and stuff is pretty miraculous. So then I get to the New Jersey and now we have our first female enlisted show up, and it's really cool to see. That was like
because you were the genesis of that decision.
That was a 9-year life cycle before
Sure.
I saw my first female enlisted come on board.
Is she the first female enlisted on a
first female enlisted? I guess on a Virginia class.
Yeah.
So pretty big deal.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So plank owner on a Virginia class. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So, I mean, the Navy's done a pretty decent job with that D&I. Is that what they call it in the Navy? The diversity and inclusion strategy? Or?
Yeah, it's definitely a inclusion strategy. And the thing that I like most about it is that differentiation of thought that you get from having females on board, and because it's, I've been on enough submarines and heard the same
Sure.
lines like over and over, and it's not that you don't get those lines from females, but you also get different perspectives too, that you're like, it makes total sense once you hear them say it.
Sure.
But until they say it, like nobody on the submarine has like ever thought of that before.
Sure.
Like, oh man, why didn't I think about that? That was
There are
that
tons of
was-
studies that scientists have done regarding the limitations of the dynamics of just having nothing but guys
Yeah,
on a unit
I
because
believe it.
there's a lot of bravado that shuts down and neutralizes a lot of I don't know if they used the word growth, but it was like an advancement, of some kind, or evolution, or
Yeah.
for it to take shape, you need someone that has a social element that could change those things and neutralize some of those
Sure.
ego things that we guys tend to carry around, especially if you're on a submarine, right? I mean, people don't realize how many there's probably less than 300 warships in the Navy, right?
Yeah.
And I'd say 75.
There's like 65-ish to 70 crews if you count the PCUs or not.
So think about that. If you're in the Navy and there's 323,000 sailors, 65 of them are, that's a pretty,
Small.
it's a small fraternity to be a part of, but it's also a very elite one to be a part of, right? And it puts you in a different circle where you're being exposed to a lot of other things. Like you were saying, like I'll see everything in one day on a surface ship versus the limitations that we get exposure to on a submarine, but we
Yeah.
still see stuff on submarines, right? But like now you're exposed to a whole bunch more dynamics by introducing, the diversity and inclusion of others.
Right.
And there's obviously challenges that come with that, but there's obviously major upsides and gains. And like I said, there's tons of studies that talk about why. Like I listened to a podcast and it was about trying to just simply add more women to my leadership team, right? And what the value and gains of that are. Not that I was questioning that I wouldn't be. I have a daughter. I want her to be able to be on any leadership team. She should be able to function at any altitude and airspeed, right? But it did talk about like how it puts more of the challenge on us to change because we get so relaxed in the way that we engage with others that we could do it in a way that could be, frankly cavalier,
Yeah.
and we have to tighten that shit up. We're working on that now, right? But there's a lot of things that we're seeing even within our industry, and like Dean Nelson and Infrastructure Masons is leading this massive campaign on ESG, including, a lot of diversity and inclusion stuff that he's laying out these roadmaps for others to be able to just kind of pick up from where he left off at, making it easier for us to find ways to make adoption better.
Yeah. So I had, when I told you I went back to Tennessee and I was part of the, like managing where the female enlisted.
That's
came
like where all the
from.
detailers are, right?
Yeah. So when you ask about people coming in from, you're like, well, she must have been a aircraft carrier, sailor, or aviation, or surface.
Well, I assume because carriers have nuclear,
Well,
but she's a
right.
torpedo man, so
It's torpedo man. But when we first built the program, it was mainly like 80% of the sailors, the female sailors that would come to a boat in that specific group, they would be conversion sailors, maybe even 85%. But it's just not a sustainable model. So very similarly to what I think is happening right now in the data center sector, and a lot of parallels, trying to pull females from other industries or from data center to data center. There's limitations, and I went in and flipped the script and said, and I briefed this all the way up to the submarine force commander of, hey, we need to empower young female session sailors that are coming in out of high school and trust them, bring them into the submarine force. And we switched from bringing in 17 conversion sailors and 4 accessions to 17 accession sailors and 4 conversions, just because so we could have some of that senior leadership. And I think that's one of the things that the data center industry could learn from, of just like figure out a method and just give females a chance. Like,
Sure.
just go out and be like, hey, this year I'm gonna hire 10 females. Like, I challenge a company to, maybe if it's a small company, maybe that's a lot. If it's a big company, maybe it's not. Which I think people would just be surprised at like the capacity and
I think
the
what I've
output.
learned is it doesn't matter. Like I hired a damage controlman from the Coast Guard
Yeah.
once, and aviation boatswain's mate from the Navy, and those two ladies. Like I think that when I see these women coming out of the military, I don't feel like it's not like they have a chip on their shoulder, but they definitely have something that they want to go prove, and they. You don't have to really motivate them that much. You just have to kind of block and tackle and then get out of their way, right?
Yeah.
Because they're so driven, and they're the hardest to find, which is why I'm really encouraged to hear that there's, women now that are getting in, enlisted women that are getting in the fleet too. Because like, when I hear a chief, I'm thinking, well, that means she's closer to retirement than starting, and hopefully I can get this person into our industry when she's done, in the submarine game. But we want more of them, so
Sure.
we are going to be better as an industry as we see them rolling out of the fleet and come in our direction. Because who better than to go explain some of that stuff and advocate for them than them? Like I can so much, but they can do it even better, right?
Yeah.
We just need to give them a platform, and that's that's part of the thing that we do with this and the conference itself. But like getting like the podcast was the byproduct of the conference. The conference was because I felt like too many conferences just said all the same stuff. It didn't matter which one you went to, it was all basically the same. So I said, let's create a different environment for a different exchange.
Right.
And then let's make it easier for those that are new in the industry to have contact directly with the celebrities of this industry. And I think it's working. That led to people wanting more of the conference, and it was like if I did more than one a year, and I looked at other markets and we looked at more
that'd be
things.
tough.
It just also realized it's a collateral thing. I mean, most of those other conferences are doing that as their primary business. We didn't do it to make money. We did it to make a difference. We basically try to pour all the money right back into the show and try to create a more vibrant environment where the higher energy level with all the right celebrities to connect, because they're the ones that have the vision, right? Like the deans and those guys have the big fat brains that are thinking about the big ways that we're going to move the needle in the next 10 years. But they need a whole army behind them to bring that vision to life. And those people typically sit in that audience.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them are from the ecosystem. They're the vendors or the supply chain or the labor force that they need to bring that, facility to life. So I think at those conferences, we have to still use that as a big megaphone. And I'm using it more for also attracting more military. But the podcast was the way to give people more, because people are like, man, I only got to hear from that person for 45 minutes. I wish I could see him again. Well, I could do a podcast with them and go a couple hours deep. And then that in this long version format, you get to really, without interruption, relate more to people and then understand them. So if Crosby or Tony and those guys are up here, not only do people understand them better, but now they understand how to approach them with their solutions better. And believe it or not, most of those guys are looking for better solutions all the time.
Yeah.
The soup's never done cooking for those guys. They're always looking to optimize. So the best kept secrets in that industry hopefully are going to be revealed because of the networking that takes place that allows people to discover, oh, I can move my business forward faster if I use your tools and multiplier to mine. Let's do it. Let's partner up, right? But that's what comes out of those. The podcast is a byproduct of not having more conferences and not having more time with those speakers. So for me, we want to really identify this podcast to be able to go to the bases, right? Because there will be other sailors that are sitting around that are going to be like, I could just show up to a conference and I don't have to know anybody and people will still come up and approach me. Sure, just show up in a uniform so they know that you're not from within the industry. And everyone's going to come up because this industry is full of a lot of amazing people.
Right.
And everybody started from somewhere. We all know how those people feel. And a majority of the time, it's a veteran that's like, man, I wish I had a podcast to listen to introduce me to data centers. So when I got out, I knew exactly what I could go do. But I didn't even know this industry existed, right? I mean, you sound like you didn't even know this industry existed until 6 months ago.
Yep. 6 months ago.
So imagine trying to leave something that you've done for 20 years. And within the last 6 months, you discover a brand new industry you didn't even know existed. And it happens to be the healthiest industry in the world and the most critical industry in the world, because no business can advance themselves without technology, and technology falls back to data centers. So like we are, as the consumers, driving so much of this growth, but these businesses are limited in their ability to evolve and provide more solutions to their own clients and customers until they could have a better leverage of technology, which again goes back to a data center. So helping educate these soldiers, sailors, and airmen at the enlisted side or the officer side, that there's opportunities here, but more importantly, they need you in this industry and they value what you bring in this industry because you're typically trained on advanced weapons and machinery and technology, as well as working within the hierarchy of a very, very disciplined workforce that doesn't measure its downtime in seconds like our industry does. It measures it in mortality, because if you did have an emergency on your submarine and you couldn't get the periscope depth and snorkel, bad things happen. People die, right? So, yeah, I mean, a lot of these people that they come in with a different emotional context.
Yeah.
Like what makes, when they get pressure tested, it's a different level, it feels like sometimes. And those ladies that we were bringing on, they're not traditional. They're not submarine Navy nukes. They're not Air Force power pros. They're aviation boatswain's mates, deck div, damage control men. They're MPs, and they still can find a way to learn about this industry through immersion and go make a really meaningful career, because this industry, man, it is the Wild Wild West for us still. I mean, we're still in its infancy,
Yeah.
right? So the way that we build things today, experience is less valuable in my opinion, because we change and evolve so aggressively. I mean, this industry literally reinvents itself on a quarterly basis, if not, monthly. So experience doesn't matter if what I'm doing today is wildly different than what I did last year or 2 years ago.
Right.
And it's going to be that much more different 2 years from now. So what I need is the ability and you have to have agility and the ability to learn, and change is hard. Like a lot of people don't like change, right? I mean, sitting in a shitty job doing something you don't like is hard. People just don't know which hard to pick sometimes. And I always say that's why I go back to what matters most. Like for you, as you're transitioning, you have to start with like, what matters most? The stability of any job, just to be in the space, or do you want to do something that, really wakes you up in the morning? And some people, just want to get in the game, right? And I get that too, right? So sometimes you don't know where to go. You don't know, you don't know. So you just got to get in, and then from there you can navigate through it and figure out, okay, maybe I'm not a catcher. I really ought to be on third base, right? But you won't know that until you're in the game.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So for you going through this transition, how now having, been to the conference and got plenty of connections, where does that leave you? Like, where are you at in, not like I have this many days until I go to take terminal leave. I mean, like, where are you at does it take anxiety away from you or worry about your opportunities that exist when you leave the military?
I mean, it is eye opening to see the different opportunities that are out there. It's refreshing for it, because I have, for my personal instance, I have 6 months before my, like, hey, you are no longer in the Navy. And what I've done is I've set up a tiered system of my tier 1 position right now, and from now until maybe 4 months or 3 months until I get out, and then maybe I'll restructure a little bit. But business development, sales, and then operations. Operations kind of like the no-brainer. I've been operating nuclear power plants for 21 plus years. I can operate a data center. And some people will say, like, we should just go do that. Well, I also want to challenge myself and want to learn stuff. Like, that's why I have different master's degrees, because I have that thirst for knowledge on different stuff. And that's why my wife and I have created a real estate investment company, because we wanted to do that. We want to, like, drive that change and see the change. Like, I get a lot of satisfaction from seeing and, like, that actual change and improvement in stuff, like whether that's like flipping a house,
sure,
or improving your net operating income, reducing your expenses. Like, now I'm seeing the value of this business or company grow because of steps that I've taken to improve it. And I'm always like thinking of stuff in the back of my head. So to have something to more narrowly focus on, because before I went to the data center conference, I was like, you ever see one of those electric balls where you like put your hand on it and then like it's just got those things? Like, that's
Sure.
kind of what I felt like. Like, my little sparks were going like in every direction.
You're shotgunning it.
And shotgunning it. And then what the DCAC did for me was like it put its hand on the ball, and then all of the electricity like went to that one spot. So like now I'm like very focused
on this industry.
on that industry, and now I can, and it takes some of that pressure, that side pressure off, if that makes sense.
What's the type of advice that other submariners that are in the industry have given you? Like, do you find some of that information is guiding you towards more in the operation side than, because it's just a easy place for people to identify your abilities right off the bat?
Yeah, a lot of the submariners that I've talked to are either in operations or in the project management aspects of it, which project management
Or commissioning. A lot of commissioning.
or commissioning guys. And going through the new construction cycle on a new Virginia class submarine, like you're hitting all of those wickets. Like I just spent the last year going to meetings every day about the construction progress, and I didn't realize it at the time, but as we were doing like the different steam testing, so we're testing different pieces of the equipment in the engine room before we test the reactor plant and take it, power it up.
People don't realize it's the command officer of a submarine.
That's we're commissioning the engine room, which is
level 1, level 2. Yeah, you're just doing
all
stages.
the same stuff. So that's
a multi-billion-dollar project, and you as the CEO, as the command officer, is effectively the CEO of that business.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting perspective because and I guess not having done it yet, building a data center where you're operating with all the different, you're working with the different vendors. Obviously you have a prime, and you're figuring out like
it's not as complicated as building a submarine. I promise.
Who's making the calls, and this one guy that's worked here for 40 years, like he knows exactly how to do this thing perfectly. But if he's not here, then forget about it, type stuff. So it's that 1 year was pretty valuable, and if I end up in that role, but even just having that experience in my in my bag of tricks will be helpful.
What do you think the Navy prepared you for best? I mean, what do you think the Navy gave you that you would consider an advantage? Because as you're talking, right, there's going to be people that are listening that work in the ecosystem, meaning they're they're either brokers in the real estate side doing site selection, they're architect firms or engineering firms, they're general contractors, there's all the professional trades that perform the actual duties themselves. There's the commissioning agents, as we talked about. And then the other part of the ecosystem is all the low voltage structured cabling people, all the equipment manufacturers, from generators to UPSs and all the way down to, the whips. All of those people listen, as well as the operators from the enterprise data center side, the operators from the co-location providers, as well as the cloud, the large cloud data center groups. Those people all listen. And as you talk to, or as you answer that question, like think about it from their optics. Like, what is the greatest advantage that you think the military did? And there's 20 years of all the leadership training you've had, all the technical training you've had, operational training, audits, tests, all those things. Like, what is it that you feel gives you that greater advantage? So then they're listening, they're like, oh, well, that's exactly what we needed.
Yeah. So I think if you take a submariner and maybe anybody in the nuclear Navy, that's who I can speak for.
Sure.
The things that I've done my last 2 or 3 tours, when you're in charge of either a department or multiple departments, or you're the captain, the root cause analysis, when everything's going great, it seems easy, right?
Sure.
But what happens when things don't go great? What lessons do you learn from that stuff? And presenting that stuff to the team in a way that doesn't make them resentful that you're challenging the status quo. So meaning like, hey, this wasn't our fault. Like, well, was it really not your fault, or was it an equipment failure? Was it, most of the time it's leadership has put them in a very poor situation that,
sure,
because no sailor comes to work and says like, I want to break this, or no civilian comes to work and says like, hey, I'm going to break this data center today. There's some recipe that's been concocted that you've now put them in a place that something is going to go wrong. Either material is going to fail, the person is going to fail, or you're going to enact some safety interlock or something like that. So I think one of the things that I've tried to do over my last 3 tours is have a very healthy and robust lessons learned program that it celebrates just going and, we call them scalable critiques. So if it's like a very big thing where, somebody got like a 450 volt shock all the way down to, we found we'd lined something up wrong and there was a valve out of position that was didn't really impact anybody, but we'd learned something from it. So that may just be the watch team. There may be a departmental critique, or you might have a whole command level critique just to get, and what those do is you get different people's input and perspective into it to help resolve those issues, and then figure out, okay, do we need to just train watch teams? Do we need to train the entire command? I guess the civilian equivalent would be, do we need to pull in the vendor and like talk about this, or can we just talk to the AC guys specifically, or the bus bar installers, or whatever. So I think that's the thing that's unique specifically to submariners,
is this constant need to optimize, to like find faults and everything. So it does take a different mindset, because a lot of people feel that challenge is more of a they don't like being
so remember
criticized.
Did you ever have a tag out issue on your boat?
Every submarine does. I've seen it. I have not failed a tag out problem, but I've seen it.
You've seen it, right?
And it's devastating. Yeah.
It's devastating.
Right.
I celebrate those. So the guy that, like, the way it would work, and I don't fully understand the lockout tag out, but I've from my understanding, it's very similar to the danger tag process on submarines. You hang a tag, somebody first checks it, signs it, second checks it, signs it, and then if a repair activity, somebody else comes in, they sign it as well. If somebody finds a mistake on one of my submarines and says, hey, they didn't sign this, or this thing's in the wrong position, on some submarines, that person is not going to bring that up, because they're going to, the fear of the reprisal or
100%.
the next tag out violation, they're going to captain's mast.
Yeah.
Right. You've heard them all. I celebrate those. So I find that sailor who found the error and say, like, hey man, good job. On the New Jersey, I would give out, I had command stickers. I'd sign the back of them.
Nice.
Give them that. On the New Mexico, I had command coins and stuff. But it like takes some of that edge off. Right. And now people are more willing to come forward with these perceived like negative connotation problems. And then you deal with the other side of it. Like, okay, well, how did we actually get, like, what actually happened?
Did you pencil whip it? Right. Like, how do you miss it? Right.
We'll get the guys in here, and I always make a concerted effort to talk about, like, I don't understand what everybody is doing, because your level of knowledge in these specific areas is so much higher than what my specific knowledge is in those areas. And without everybody contributing, like, for me, I know there's some super smart nuke CEOs out there that they do know.
Yeah. They still stay up to date with everything.
But without those guys, like, I'm not turning any valves. I'm not writing tag outs. I'm not doing all the minute detail stuff. I can't do anything. Like, the submarine's not going to go anywhere. It will just stay tied up to the pier. I would be standing up in the top of the submarine barking orders, but nobody would be doing anything, right? So I always make a very strong effort to remind them, like, how important piece of the cog they are to that everyday churn, and that we'll figure out what the failure was, and how they got into that position, and not just.
I will say this: I think on a submarine, they're not celebrating the failure as well as you do, probably where I came from, but they do welcome the opportunity to figure out what's not working. And they're typically doing it because they want to understand if this is a breakdown in discipline, right?
Yep.
So people get very complacent. You know, if you have a static environment, if we're not at a high op tempo, mediocrity kicks in, and we just don't have the attention to detail sometimes because we're moving slow, right? And sometimes slow is not better, right? Because you lose that momentum of pace and you lose your cadence in the way that you think. Because sometimes I was better when we were spinning harder. I mean, I idle at an 80 all the time, all right now, because I just need to always be grinding, right?
Sure.
So I could see that, but the celebration side of it, where it was, I didn't see that much, but I could tell you, like, just in listening to what you're saying, that's an advantage because the mindset that you bring into it is you don't see problems, you see opportunities. And it sounds like I'm not trying to speak for you, but that's what I heard.
And I don't even like to use the word problems. I prefer challenge. I think problems like you have a bad rash, that's a problem.
Sure. Well, I think it also speaks to the leadership side of what you guys learn at that level, right? Because like you said, you have to come off the subject matter expert role because you're no longer the engineer or whatever, and now you're managing teams. And unlike contractors, like when you lead teams of contractors, it's different because you have a contract with them, and you sometimes have to take a very assertive approach with them. Leading teams of people doesn't work like that, right? If you have FTEs or a crew of people, you can't fire them on the spot, so you gotta invest heavy into them. I think that's the greatest advantage that we in the military bring is a lot of empathy in the way that we lead. You know, at least, like I was telling you this, I've heard horrible stories from sailors. I worked for amazing people. Like my old master chief is a guy named, my old chief that retired as master chief is a guy named Bruce Lee. How do you ever forget that name? He'll be doing a podcast with me in March. And he was the type of guy that led in a way in which you were never sure if he liked you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But like, if he invested any effort into you, and he did. It wasn't in the tone or the words he had to use. You just knew that if he was touching you, then that means that he obviously liked you, because if he didn't like you, then he wouldn't be challenging you, to be a better person, right? So I had great leaders even throughout all the officers I worked for were great. I learned so much stuff. I was lucky, right? I didn't get out because I didn't like it. I got out because I was ready to go do something different, but I got to work for amazing people. But sometimes, there's always probably somebody that sneaks through and their leadership style is more of just pivot hard, rotate with a bigger hammer, and punish as much as you can as a deterrent, Yep. That's a leadership style. I've seen that too.
Yeah, I think one of my junior officers on New Mexico one of the things I try to do is teach them about some of these soft skills or things that I've learned about emotional intelligence. And we're talking about empathy. And one of my rules was there was no yelling on the submarine. So like if you've gotten to the point where you're yelling, then you've failed as a leader, right? You haven't done a good enough job of, there are some, you're fighting a fire. Obviously you're going to be yelling because you get how loud it would be. Or if there's somebody's about to get shocked, you're going to yell to get their attention to get them out. But on a day-to-day basis, like that shouldn't be your leadership hammer that you're breaking out every day. And we were talking about like why do you think people yell? And when you listen to, and I had some brilliant guys. A couple of my junior officers were UPenn graduates, and just a lowly Naval Academy guy. Right. So and he talked about people yell, like what his thought was that because you're not as emotional. I want you to be as emotional about this topic, that whatever that topic is, that as I am, and you're not. I can tell that you're not as into this, whatever it is, but I want you to feel that. So, in some people's instances, the way they make them try to feel that is like it comes out as that anger and that yelling. And if you reflect back onto some of the times you've probably gotten yelled at. Maybe once or twice.
Dude, for me, an ass chewing was necessary every now and then. So,
but it was because your mental state wasn't the same place that whoever was leading you, that chief or master chief, you weren't as enthusiastic about whatever you were supposed to be doing.
Sure, I had to be motivated, right?
And that's the tool that comes out. And a lot of times, like sometimes it can be positive, but most of the time it's a negative.
I can see that. I mean, like I feel like I can I get yelled at all the time, so I feel like I'm okay with it a little bit. But I could see how it could easily shake people up and
Yeah.
stir their emotion to where they lose focus and track. And that doesn't. I mean, anything that erodes from productivity, I'm typically against right now. But
Yeah.
sometimes,
And you think who do you primarily work with are people that are in their mid-20s to 30s, not the guys that are coming straight out of high school,
sure,
millennial.
yeah, those are definitely the ones that they don't have the scars yet or the skin thick
Yeah.
enough yet. I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the people I'm dealing with are armed to the teeth, it seems like, and I'm normally trying to just hang with them, so to speak. If you saw my management team, it's my second in command, my XO he's a Navy Academy grad, graduated 2004. He went to Wharton for his MBA, spent his time with the SEALs, right? My strategy officer was an Army Intel MP. I got combat, Marine Corps infantry officers, Army infantry officers. I got Army infantry enlisted. I get a lot of other guys that are all just powerhouses that have shit tons of data center
You
experience.
could probably say that's probably not the normal
They're
leadership group at a regular business.
takes a lot to wake up in the morning. Like, I got to get up before the enemy, as Jocko says, right? Because these guys are all so super talented that, like, I have to be able to look them in the eye and be worthy of leading those guys every day.
Yeah.
So their management style, like, they could go work anywhere else they want in this industry and probably make more money, right? If I were to just put my boots to those guys, they'll go take their talent somewhere else.
Sure.
And that doesn't help us with our mission, right?
No.
And it's just, I was telling you at lunch, you'll have no idea who you're going to meet in this space that will have a profound impact on your future career. And I had one guy a long time ago, and it was Peter Gross, and he would just give me little advice tips. And the first advice he ever gave me was, be careful the toes you step on today, Kirk, because they're going to be connected to the ass you're kissing tomorrow in this industry. And truer words were never said. I mean, I've watched people that were on the bottom end of the ecosystem. Next year, they're purchasing. They make decisions and write POs for someone that spends hundreds of millions of dollars a year on CapEx. So they remember who treated them like dog shit.
Sure.
So you have to just invest hard into people in this space. Sounds like your leadership style is accretive to that already. So, like, this is an industry where you're going to be in the space. If you get into it, like, there's a good chance you won't leave. We have a less than 10% leave this industry to go to work for competitive ones. And it's typically because if it's a cloud-based data center and they don't want to go to those rural markets and they want to be closer to an NFL city for their quality of life, or something changed, maybe they had a baby and they can't travel, they're going to find something that keeps them more balanced to whatever their life is.
Yeah.
And do that, we may lose them to a different industry because there's a lot of pent-up demand in these other industries as well that are trying to get talent, the same talent we're trying to get, right? I just think that untapped talent, that fourth rail, is the veterans. We're already here, we're prevalent, but there's not a focused and concentrated effort on that just yet. Infrastructure Masons was the first ones that really tried to create that, and Lee was the wood behind the arrow on that for years. I think Tony is taking it over as a 1-1. And, all of us will fall in line, figure out how we could help them and advance that, because it's all about that. But for us, we have veteran ambassadors, like people like you that are 5 to 6 months from being out of the military, and we'll find ways to get you involved in the industry to where it's accretive. You can make some money, but at the same time, you're an ambassador for us to the base you're at. Right.
I mean, even just the coming back and the interactions that I had at DCAC, and then interacting, I think the prime communication platform is LinkedIn.
Yeah,
for a
for
lot
sure.
of this stuff. I see a lot of posts from like Andy Davis across the pond, and Tony's always posting stuff. Dean, Bill,
Sure.
all those guys. Just from my post on there, I've received. I've had discussions with 2 other COs that are like, "Oh, tell me more about this," or
Send them our way.
Do you have time to talk about this, or how did that transition look for you, or what? So just like that social media platform, and whenever you start tapping into the guys in the Navy that are transitioning out, who are they friends with? Like, when you go on Facebook or LinkedIn and you're like, oh, except like before DCAC, like every single person on there was like Navy, 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 Navy. Like my first 500 connections, I think probably 99% of them were probably Navy. So as they transition into the sector,
Yeah.
they are now, everybody that's their friends are seeing or
Are seeing the connection. So
seeing
you're,
that, which is a powerful tool. And if you get a couple influencers in that direction, just and I don't love the word influencer, but it's just somebody that's getting the word out there, because that's all it really needs. It's like
an ambassador.
There's like a nice steak dinner. You just have to smell it, right? And you're like, oh, that smells good. But if you don't go near the restaurant where they're cooking them, you're not even gonna know that it's there. So
one of the things that we're going to try to do, 2023 for us, I hired a guy named Scott McIntyre, which came from Uptime. He worked for groups like Salute, which is Lee Kirby is the chairman and founder of Salute, which is a data center professional services company that really focuses a lot on data center operations and smart hand services and like security. They just bought Iconics, which is one of the preeminent commissioning groups in the industry.
Mhm.
They came from EYP. They came from Amazing Stock, and they have a powerhouse. And they focus on inside operations of the data center, from security and everything inside of it. We're kind of like the opposite version of them, where we're really focused on the CapEx side of the business, like the building delivery, the data center delivery product. That is primarily where we're at, and that's why they make a great, like, they're focused on, they're Salute Mission Critical because they're focused on helping the veteran community too. I mean, when they started it, I think it's their CEO, Jason Okroy. He started it by just going out and creating jobs for homeless veterans that were day laborers on construction sites. And I think at the time I was the president of a 90-plus-year-old GC based in New York, and we were only building data centers. And I remember we put those people on every project that we could, because every time you did, you knew that you were trying to give a job to a homeless veteran. And then when those guys would graduate and get, their lives together, so to speak, then they would roll into more sophisticated jobs within the industry. And they were doing their role of introducing veterans in the space. And Lee carried that on with Infrastructure Masons. And then for us, we wanted to kind of add to that collective. But there's something that the military did around 2008, the collapse of the secondary lending market when the economy was a little dodgy. They created the DoD Skill Bridge program. Were you familiar with that? As the CEO, I'm sure you probably had sailors that requested to get out on that program.
Yeah, I've had a couple who have done Skill Bridge.
It's a phenomenal program. I never knew about it. I obviously didn't exist when I was in, but I'm just learning more about it now.
Yeah.
And when Scott, who's very passionate about transitioning veterans more jobs, he comes from the infantry, and as you know, the largest percentage of those that harm themselves when they leave active duty tend to come from the infantry. And that's why the guy that runs that, the president of that business unit, is an Army combat infantry officer, and Scott's his VP, and they have other talented Army guys under their ranks, a lot of military in that side of the recruiting arm. But the DoD created a Skill Bridge program saying, hey, if you have the ability and your command will let you, up to the last 180 days of your end of obligated active duty, you can go into one of these approved programs as long as there's a training program, because it's like an apprenticeship.
Right.
That's paid for. So like we don't have to absorb the financial burden of cost of labor for that person with their benefits and stuff, because they're being paid by Uncle Sam.
Yep.
Well, the industry itself has, depending on which reports you read, like the Uptime Institute latest report said that we are 84,200 people short just in the United States between now and 2025, growing at about a 2% CAGR this year, but about a 3% CAGR for the final 2 years. And that is 84,200 just in the United States, but there's about 320,000 people will be short globally. And that's,
wow.
It's kind of a conservative estimate, right? That doesn't include the 45% of our industry that already exists. It's been in this industry for more than 20 years. And there's a lot of those people that are going to be like, hey, maybe they did something else for 20 years before they did this, but there are going to be people that are going to be packing it in the next few years. That's the existential threat. And that's where we're at the threshold of this crisis. And we're trying to figure out, how do we bridge the gap? Because the industry has needs, but what they want is someone that understands data centers. So they're like, look, we get it. Submariner has leadership check. has communications and technology, all those things, operations, but they don't have data center experience. And we're like, that's simple because this is all through immersion. So we could partner with like the IDCA or DCD or EIEIO, and we could find like CNET, and we could get accreditations and incubator programs that allow them to understand the language of the industry, the dialect, so that we could check that box. It's literally the skill bridge. So it's the bridge between what the government already set up. We as the consumers just need to create a platform that harvests from those banks, from Norfolk, from San Diego, from Fort Hood, from wherever, and we could bring on those talented people into those incubator programs and teach them the industry so that we could check the experience box. And then I think that would help because right now you have all these people reaching out to you and you have all these connections and now you understand the industry. But now when we go and we start trying to face these people and we start talking to them about the things that we want to get accomplished with you, they may say like, that's great, but does he know what a data center is? And if we have 2 months with you, right, that's all it takes for us to introduce.
Sure.
I mean, there's only so many electrical design permutations. There's only so many mechanical. And it's really trying to understand, like, this is where the money's at, and this is how they deploy capital in this vertical, and this is what these people do with it, and this is what the ripple effect downstream looks like until you are here. And this is where you could sit at any altitude and airspeed within the industry. What do you want to do? What matters most? What's your purpose? What's your passion? And you could align those things. You just need someone to map that out. And that's the experience I think they're looking for. Is they don't want to hire somebody that gets there and then realizes, like, I don't want to do this.
I don't want to do this, yeah.
And then they leave. After they've invested a lot of money into them. And I think that what you have is a dichotomy of two things, right? You have an industry that's thriving, right? We're growing at that JLL reported DCAC this year had,
I think they were through 2024 sold out or
it
already.
Showed, well, I mean, we're the last 2 years broke records in M&A, right? And I think $48 billion last year. We did $22 billion in the first half of this year with another $18 billion ready to close before, New Year's Eve last week. So there's some big deals that are going down. But what you have is there's large consolidations within the industry, right? You have all the enterprise groups consolidating down and going from the regional sites to the main sites as they outsource a lot of that to either colo or cloud. And either way, there's a lot of development in the colo and cloud side. There's I kind of got lost there in that train, but there's a lot of different ways to drag people in. Right. And the DoD SkillBridge program, it doesn't limit us to just doing operations, like data center operations people and construction and project management people. We could literally go get SkillBridge people for finance, for HR, for sales, for business development, for marketing.
Yep.
As long as they're catered to this industry, we can still produce a SkillBridge curriculum for that. That'll be approved that we can use as an incubator to bring people in and then get them training. And that's how you solve that problem, right? Because if you could check the box for experience, then it just makes it easier for people to make those decisions. And I think that from a contract perspective for like us, all we do is do contracts and professional services. When the industry's thriving and growing at a 22% CAGR, just short of that, but the economy looks like it's, we have the highest inflation rate in 40 years, right? I think that there's a lot of people that are worried about knowing that we, like the second and third quarter of next year are predicted to be very lean, right? And I think that what that means to us as a professional services group and how that impacts the veteran community is this. Maybe some companies won't be hiring more full-time employees because they're worried about prospective layoffs or something. Right. So what they do is they have needs still. They'll just go to contractors instead. And right now, 84,200 in the U.S. in the next few years, let alone what we have in the retirement pipe. And now if we build a skill bridge and you have, 24,000 people leaving the military every month right now, 20 to 24,000 people leaving active duty every month, there's a lot of talent to harvest from and bring into this industry, right? So it solves the problem of the industry, but it also helps the transitioning veteran, right? Where now you have less anxiety through that transition because now you have the ability to develop some sort of experience that is enough to validate you to a data center and enterprise or colo operator or a loud cloud provider that says, okay, yeah, you have everything. Now you understand the language of the industry. Let's go. Right. But it also allows you to pressure test that stuff too, right? Because can you imagine like all the people in the military that wanted to be pilots and they made it through flight school and they get in the plane and they get air sick and they're like, I don't want to do this. But like, do you really want to wait till you did all those things before you realize it's not what you want to do? Right. So like use the SkillBridge program to figure it out. And if you're an enterprise, if you're a company in this industry, why wouldn't you take advantage of this program?
Right.
You know, I mean,
I think the programs are great. I have several sailors that were able to do that. I know a couple of transitioning officers right now that are doing them in different industries, but just to have the opportunity for any of them is good.
I think that that's the solution for the crisis that we're getting ready to face here in the next, I would say in the next 4 quarters, we'll definitely see something really hairy happen in terms of labor. And we're just trying to position for that. But I also, as we solve the problem for the industry, we're really trying to solve the problem for the veteran community, right? Because if I could get them more meaningful jobs of purpose, allow them to transition, they're less likely to do something like to harm themselves once they get out. Because now they have a mission, new command, a new tribe, a new purpose. They get to do something significant again.
So do you think Overwatch would do the like you would get the accreditation for the SkillBridge and then you would place them in a company?
Yeah. So we'll just put them in our SkillBridge incubator program and then we'll have open job requests that we get from various companies. I think we have like 16 contracts with various companies now. We've placed people with like DataBank from a data center operator perspective has hired the most from us probably.
Yeah.
But there's other groups that we work with on like GCs, trades, whatever. It doesn't matter. We'll help anybody. But I think that
Or are they going to SkillBridge with those companies or are going to just SkillBridge with
those companies will tell us what their requirements are for their employment and we'll create a SkillBridge platform around that. And then they're just outsourcing all that risk to us.
Yeah.
We're mitigating the risk because the DoD SkillBridge program offsets the cost of their burden.
Yeah.
All I'm really paying for is training and getting them more educated. And in doing that, it benefits me because now I have someone that it's going to be easier for, let's say in 3 years from now, when you're in the industry and it's your ass on the line because you have to make a decision to hire people and their output and productivity is dependent on your leadership and your career is dependent on your ability to lead well. What would it take for you to go hire some of these candidates so you felt comfortable putting your ass on the line for that? That's what we need to solve for.
Yeah. Well, I think too, for the transitioning sailor, airman, infantryman, what have you, is they need to have, if they're going to do the SkillBridge program, one of the benefits is working with a company just so they can feel that culture. It's absolutely going to be a cultural difference than wherever they came from.
We're learning that. Yeah, I mean, I hired a lady that was Air Force, a Navy aviation bosun's mate, and I could tell even when we interviewed her, she's on an aircraft carrier with 5,000 people at a time where a startup with 25 people at tops back then, right? So I'm like, are you ready to go from a carrier to a small watercraft? You know, I'm like, it's night and day, right? So, and that's a big cultural shock. But the DoD SkillBridge lets us create that incubator based on the requirements of that business, and they get to check in on that person throughout the course of that incubator program as often as they want. Because a lot of the training will be online for them, portal stuff, but some of it will be field trips and spending time on some of these sites and walking job sites or, shadowing people. And I think that's where you find them scratching the pain on the cultural thing. But I think in the most part, that stuff will work itself out, right? Like if people don't want to go work for that one company, then now they're still trained, they're still experienced, and we have other opportunities to go park them at. We're only going to get more, right? So the industry has huge needs. So helping, what we will want out of you guys is we're going to want your help getting more reach within the bases and then serve as an ambassador and a champion for the data center industry. And then I'll go to guys like Dean and Infrastructure Masons or Tony or whoever and be like, we need help. We need to point our megaphone there and we need to draw from it. For this year at DC, when we do DCAC in 2023, it'll be a 3-day conference. The first and second day will be always the same as what it was, a charity golf event to support a veteran-owned nonprofit, networking event that night, a lot of tech knowledge, and we'll run it more like a TED Talk next year. But there's 2 tracks we'll run it with where you'll have one side that's ran from the aspect of the operator and one side that's ran by the aspect of the enterprise end user. and it'll be very focused. But when we're done, day 3 will be a hiring conference. We'll have a couple hundred pre-screened active duty military people that'll be at that conference day 3. And any company that comes from the industry that wants to interview prospective candidates will have the ability to meet them face to face. We're doing our first one in March outside Naval Station San Diego. We're getting ready to announce it's called Operation HIT, or Heroes in Transition. And the charity golf event will be for C4 Foundation, which is a Naval Special Warfare group. And it really helps those special warfare guys coming back kind of get acclimated back to their lives, because they have intense op tempos, right? And they have a very high suicide and divorce rate. So trying to provide an opportunity for them to kind of reclaim normalcy in life is really important. And we'll raise money for that. But day 2 is not a tech summit. It's just all day hiring conference. We'll have 10, 12 customers there that we'll cap it at. No more than 200 active duty military that are going to be able to transition like you. They're in the same boat as you. And they'll be able to start talking with these prospective employers way in advance. And then we'll discover what the Skill Bridge program needs to be for them to be able to be successful in that transition.
Have it lined up for them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, the DOD did that first half. We just have to do the second half. And we have the ability to do it because we already have we have a thriving business on the owner's rep side for data centers, but now we have a recruiting arm with like 8 or 9 guys, and we're just going to start placing, 40, 50, 60 people a month, right?
Wow.
Doesn't sound like a lot, but we're doing our part, right? And then we'll help be a part of that collective, like groups like Tony's leading it, Infrastructure Masons and stuff. So there's other groups that are trying to accomplish that. We're just going to figure out a way to tie those together. I think Tony's going to be trying to do that with IM. But what other advice do you have for people? What other takeaways or feedback
from DCAC, or
from the whole DCAC to now? Like,
I think one is you just have to get out there and talk to people, and through some of my conversations I've realized, like, yep, I don't want to do that part of the data center stuff. And then some of the other, like, you just hear some really great stuff, but if you don't make that leap and just start talking to people, you're never going to know.
I think it's
where you even start.
Tony did a good job on his podcast of saying, like, hey, when we come out as captains, like, we're expected to do all these things. And he's like, I had to kind of find what I really wanted to do, right? And it sounds like he's kind of discovered that. He worked for a couple of the big shops for a while.
Yeah.
But, like, finding those guys and creating that bigger collective so that there's a bigger no matter how smart you are, you're not as smart as all of us together. It seems like sometimes we put all those ideas together, and that's what we need to create, those pockets, and you can help lead those pockets in Norfolk. Well, we have guys leading them in Hawaii or in San Diego, and then we'll have people leading them at Fort Hood and Camp Pendleton. We have, with Scott McIntyre being a Marine on our team and this being his greatest passion, like, we're going to be getting deeper into the Marine Corps side as well. But between the Army and the Navy, we have a ton of reach. Actually have some reach on the Air Force side. The Marine Corps was the one that we needed more help with. So you having, you're in orbit around a lot of those things. Maybe you still have some guys that you have reach to that went on that side when they graduated instead of going Navy.
Yeah.
It's just reaching them. We just have to network and connect.
Through LinkedIn, Facebook to some extent.
Yeah.
But,
well, I mean, look, we packaged a lot. It's been almost 2 hours, right? And I could go for another 2, but the reality is, like, I wanted to see what the value was that was gained. And it sounds like, would you recommend others to come to this event? Do you have other guys that you want to send our direction next year? Or?
Yeah, I think since DCAC, I've sent a couple of guys your direction already.
Oh, perfect.
Whether you've known it or not, but one sailor that was getting out for medical reasons, which, the Navy transitions a lot of sailors for medical stuff, because especially the nuke program is there's a whole nother nuclear physical that you have to pass on top of the submarine physical. Yeah. And a lot of those sailors end up either transitioning out altogether or into other ratings for a period of time before they get out. So there's and they have a medical issue. They're not broken. They're highly skilled.
Yeah, for sure. They just need a new home.
Send
them our way.
And so what I was going to say, I remember now, was one of the challenges that some of the folks that I met have helped me work through. And I've had a discussion with Tony about this and discussion with Bill and a couple other folks about like the thing that I don't have to put a value on myself in the Navy, because all I have to do is I can go online and type in an 05 with over 20 years and submarine pay. And
Sure.
it tells me what my value is, right?
Sure.
So trying to figure out like what my value is coming out, or, you know, the 5-year sailor or 5-year officer, 10-year, like what do they think their value is coming out? I think that's a piece that you need to talk to other people to kind of land in the ballpark of what's your perceived versus actual
Sure.
value. And every once in a while people hear of this guy got out and he's making $1 bazillion, and you know, for every one of those there's 10 people that aren't making
You're at Home Depot. Yeah.
$1 bazillion. So that's been, those guys have been great, helping me kind of navigate that scene.
What and we'll start breaking this home, I guess. But let me ask you this: when you tell people I'm looking at data centers, and they say, "What's a data center?" What do you tell them?
Yeah, so I said I usually phrase it with when I say data center, like, what do you think? And you know, everybody says the same thing, like, you're just and I was like, I can't program anything. Like I was a computer science major for a little bit at the Naval Academy, and once we got past like into the arrays of C++ and stuff, I was like, I'm out. I switched majors, and so that's what I've realized. Like DCAC opened my eyes of, it's not just computer programming. If computer like, I don't even think I heard anybody say computer programming,
No,
right? You're not
that's
software engineer type stuff, software as a service. There's definitely some of that in there, but even those guys that I talked to weren't like creating the software for the most part. So I think I always ask them, what do you think?
Data center
when I
is?
say data center, like, what are you thinking? And then I kind of unpackage on, no, it's actually like, and I give like 5 or 6 examples.
Let's hear it.
Like,
I'm always interested in what people, only because there may be something. There's a lot of people. I ask this question all the time on this podcast at the end, and you'd be surprised. There's some really good answers.
Yeah.
Some people have some really good answers.
well, I mean, I tell them, I was like, it depends on the data center. Can be kind of whatever you want it to be. If you like real estate stuff, there's a home for you. If you like business development, there's a home for you. If you like operations, there's a home for you. If you're a software guy, there's a home somewhere for you. And then you manage cloud, you manage, I don't really say edge at all, because that's probably outside of the normal vernacular, but and you know, where your Facebook, where your Instagram, where your TikTok, like all that stuff just lives in a data center somewhere.
All right.
And you got to feed and take care of it. And usually at that point, their eyes are like, holy smokes, like I had no idea.
Yeah, it's a big building that serves as the home for the cloud, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard to wrap your mind around how to explain it. And every time I feel like I still haven't arrived at what that perfect narrative looks like, but I'm still looking for it. That's just why I ask everybody, even people that are brand new to the space, because I'm like, sometimes they have the simplest approach in how they view things. So it's always the best. You know, when you're on the outside looking in, it could be easier to see.
And it's easy if I'm talking to a nuclear trained whoever, and I just say, it's just like our, we call them P&Is, or protective instruments for the reactor. Like they have multiple power sources, and we have our different buses. So if we lose something, it'll get backup power, just like an UPS, and then it switches over to the battery if that runs out. If the reactor
Those buildings
goes
could
down.
island themselves off the grid. And in some cases, these data centers could backfeed the grid, close transition, right? So, yeah, I mean, these are pretty powerful infrastructure platforms, right? And they're there to host all the technology, the servers, the storage, networking software, all those things that make the racks that produce the IT output, right? But those things, think of a data center like a computer, right? It's just a bigger home for it. You know,
Sure.
You have a aggregate of storage and networking and everything. So it's depending on who you talk to, they all have a different narrative, right? But what's your advice to any of those people now knowing what you've learned? Because before you discovered our industry, what were you looking at?
So I was looking at distribution centers, looking at some medical sales type stuff because whenever I lay out my EQI is the EQ test, or I don't know if it's called a test, but analysis program that I've done. I score very, very well on the
Like
on the
Hogan or Rorschach?
No, it's called EQI.
Okay. It's just measuring what your aptitude is really based for.
Yeah, based on the different segments of emotional intelligence, and it compares you to previous.
What did yours come back with?
They were
psychopath.
No, whenever I so you get debriefed by submarine medical officers, so they debrief all the other, like, this happens during your command tour instructional course. So they see all those folks, and he came back and he's like, these are the highest scores of EQ of a submarine officer that I've ever seen.
Nice.
He said, I bet that people will really enjoy having you as a commanding officer, and I bet your boat will run well.
Nice.
And
that's a huge testament, because if those guys are seeing all you whack jobs all the time in the wardroom, right? There's a lot of I joke, because I would always call him I had a really good officer that I worked for, Lieutenant Ward, and another guy you never knew who, if he liked you or not, because he ran with the highest standard possible, and if you were anything below that standard, he made sure you knew it, right? And we used to always joke, I'm like, man, that guy's a psychopath, because he ran with a razor's edge, but his attention to detail, he was former enlisted. He just wanted us to be at our best. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, he really pushed hard, and I used to joke about, I'm like, are all these guys, like, they send you guys to a special school to learn how to fucking be mean like that? But then I realized, I'm like, no, they're just trying to make sure we're not killing ourselves.
Yeah. Well, part of the whole thing is leaders can have great intent, but if they don't explain the why behind it, I find that not everybody's going to pick up on it. So if I'm driving you hard into the ground every day, but I've also explained to you why I'm doing this and what the end goal is, you're going to receive that message much differently than if I'm just driving your face into the ground every day.
But I think that, you hit on the perfect spot to wrap this up at, and that is hiring a new Marine. He turned me on to a book that I'm into right now called Call Sign Chaos. Have you ever heard of this one? Mad Dog Mattis, former Secretary of Defense. And his entire book is about mastering the ability to express your intent. It's all about commander intent, right? And that's a leadership advantage I think the military does a really good job on, because they ingrain that in us. Like, for me, my bosses didn't have to tell me exactly how to go do everything I needed to go get done. They just had to tell me their intent and then let me go solve for it, right? And that is something that's beneficial, I think, to officers and enlisted coming out, because there are those that are expected to lead and those that are expected to be led, and we kind of transform throughout our ranks. But I think being able to just take the intent of the leadership and being able to execute on that gives us an advantage, where some people need much more detail. And I think the ability to lead by basically being able to just deliver that intent very clearly without giving us play-by-play micromanagement instructions allows us to work with autonomy that makes us feel safe. And I think that we're more fulfilled when we get to operate like that, right? So that intent aspect that you mentioned was the part that I wanted to come back to, just simply because that is an advantage that you have. Being able to be productive and move high-speed, low drag means you have to be able to have a clear intent that could resonate from a 3 or a 4-star all the way down to a corporal, right? And that's hard, to be able to break down your intent into the simplest of terms that could be codified in a way that anybody could understand. That takes a lot of practice.
Yeah, Napoleon had it's called the corporal rule. If you're giving out an order, it needs to be understood by the lowest rank corporal.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a bad order.
Interesting. Well, there's a lot of references I've had to Napoleon in the last 3 or 4 weeks, various books and podcasts I've gone into, but it's interesting to see him being praised as much for some of the attention to detail you did on leadership. That's awesome. Well, listen, what have we not unpackaged here that you want to make sure you left with anybody that's listening?
I don't know. I think I'll probably think of it as soon as we sign off. But
Sure.
I think we touched on a lot of stuff today. I really appreciate the opportunity to come down here and share my story a little bit. Hopefully, it helps somebody. Whether they're on the edge, and I find this a lot whenever I'm talking to people about real estate. And I was probably the same way before I made my first deal. Sometimes you just need that little push to get that momentum going in that direction. And I think that's one of the good things about these podcasts is it's once you crack one of them open, they kind of just roll into the next one, and it's helping people get that momentum into the sector. And
you found that? Did it help you?
Yeah,
listen to some of these podcasts?
That's why I'm doing a podcast now.
Nice. All right. Well, listen.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing your story. And I have to believe that there's going to be some folks that listen and they could relate to something, or they may have value in the things that you said and they want to engage with you. So like if they did, why don't you, they can find you on LinkedIn, first name, last name, how pronounce it or spell it out for them so they have no problem finding you.
Jared, Jared Smith, Smith. My email, if anybody wants to reach out, jaredcsmith1@gmail.com. Just search Jared Smith Submarines on LinkedIn. You should
if you can't reach you, just reach out to me and I'll be glad to put you together with whoever. So if someone's listening and they don't know how to get you,
absolutely.
If they could get me, then I can gladly broker that introduction to you and anybody else. And there's other people that have reached out, since I've done a couple other podcasts focused more on military people that are going to be going through transition, trying to get into this space. This podcast will have subject matter experts. We have, I think, 50 something plus podcast requests right now. So
that's awesome.
We're sifting through and figuring out who we're going to plug in next. And I'm trying to kind of thread the needle and make sure I have a fairly steady balance of really strong industry thought leaders that have something that they can express that allows us to move the needle in the industry while also helping those that are trying to get into the industry understand how to do that.
Yep.
So this was critical, and this was really, really valuable to me to help me understand, where we're at in pace of some of our objectives as a business, but we want to help as many of these veterans transition as we can. So I'm sure that we'll find a way to stay in touch after you go back to Norfolk and figure out how we can make sure that you're still making progress of getting traction for a new opportunity within the space while simultaneously, giving us the opportunity to have more traction within the bases. So we just want to help. We're not trying to poach from the Navy, but if those that are deciding to leave, we want to give them a home. Yep. And I think the Navy wants to probably help them transition too, or the military in general should be incentivized to helping these people that had served honorably in uniform that could help, bring that same level of character and discipline into our industry. They should be proud that those people are coming off and contributing to something bigger than themselves still. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. And I look forward to hearing some sea stories tonight, or maybe over a shot of tequila or something.
All right. Sounds great.
Thanks, man.